Her daughter-in-law toasted to her face. "Let's thank Mom for finally seeing a real home." And the room laughed. Elaine Monroe didn't blink. She sipped her tea, silently recalling the mortgage, still in her name. By nightfall, she'd begin stripping them of the dream house they thought was theirs. She'd co-sign the deed. Now she was co-signing their exit. This wasn't revenge, it was ownership. And when the HOA, the bank, and the law came knocking, the only name they'd see was hers. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Elaine stepped into the house, her shoes clicking softly against the smooth oak floors. It was breathtaking in its grandiosity, the soaring ceilings, the sleek modern lines, the abundance of natural light that spilled into every corner of the open floor plan. But as she stood there in the entryway, her fingers loosely clutching the handle of her tea, she couldn't shake the sensation that she had just walked into a showroom, not a home. This house was everything Sienna had wanted, everything she had dreamed of, and more. Jordan, ever the eager-to-please son, had undoubtedly spent hours working with her to bring the vision to life. The stone fireplace was a showpiece, the kitchen an island of gleaming stainless steel and marble. The furniture was minimal, clean, and pristine, as if untouched by real life. Sienna glided over with a glass of champagne in hand, her smile polished, her tone slightly rehearsed. "Mom, so glad you could make it." "It looks amazing, doesn't it?" she said, her voice as smooth as the designer countertops. Elaine barely glanced at the glass she was handed. Her fingers curled around the delicate stem, but she didn't lift it to her lips. The effervescent bubbles felt foreign. Everything in this space felt foreign. "I'm happy to be here," Elaine murmured, though she could feel the weight of her words, like they didn't fit the space they were spoken in. Sienna didn't seem to notice. She was too busy surveying the guests milling around, chatting, laughing. It was as if everyone in this house was living in a bubble that Elaine wasn't invited to occupy. She looked around at their faces, all of them polite but just a little too polished, as though they had been prepped for this moment. Her heart ached. This was not how life was supposed to feel. The polished smiles, the sparkling drinks, the sense of calm that seemed to hover in the air, it was all a little too perfect, too curated. Then came the toast. Sienna lifted her glass high, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Let's give thanks to Mom for finally seeing a real home," she said, her words light but laced with something sharp. The laughter that followed was quick and polite, but there was a tension in the air. It wasn't the kind of laughter that made you feel included. It was the kind of laughter that made you realize you were the punchline of a joke no one had bothered to explain. Elaine sipped her tea, her hand steady, her face unreadable. She didn't react, didn't join in the forced mirth. The toast was a reminder of everything she hadn't been a part of, the house, the decisions, the perfect image they were all trying so hard to project. The silence that followed stretched out just long enough for Elaine to feel the weight of it. Maya, standing at the top of the staircase, was the only one who seemed to notice the shift in the room. Her eyes met Elaine's across the space, but the young woman didn't move. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her body language an odd mixture of discomfort and resignation. She didn't belong here either, Elaine could tell. Not in this house, not in this life. Elaine's gaze lingered on Maya for a moment, but before she could make any sense of the unspoken tension between them, Sienna was pulling her back into conversation, introducing her to a group of guests she didn't know. She smiled and nodded, trying her best to be present, but it was all a blur. The words felt like background noise, the clinking of glasses, the laughter that always seemed to come too quickly, the polite compliments and small talk. None of it felt real. Sienna was in her element, floating from group to group with ease, while Jordan charmed the guests, his laughter booming and filling the spaces between them. Everything in this house was made to impress, to dazzle. It was designed to make people feel as if they were part of something special, something unattainable. And maybe that was what hurt most of all, that Elaine had once hoped she could be a part of this. But now, standing in the middle of it, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a celebration of family. It was a celebration of a fantasy, a life that had been built on the illusion of perfection. She stood near the open doors leading to the backyard, watching as the last of the evening sun bathed the manicured lawn in a soft golden light. It was all so carefully curated, down to the way the light filtered through the trees. It made her feel like an outsider in a way she hadn't expected. The evening stretched on, but time seemed to slow as Elaine drifted further from the center of the party. The guests slowly trickled out, their laughter fading with each passing minute. She retreated to the kitchen, standing by the polished counters, trying to steady her thoughts. She rinsed out her teacup, her movements automatic. That's when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Phil. "They know the mortgage is still under your name, right?" Elaine froze, the cup slipping slightly from her hand before she steadied it. Her heart thudded in her chest as she read the words again. Her thumb hovering over the screen. They know. The mortgage, the house, the debt. All of it had been her responsibility for years, a secret she had carried on her own, never fully letting Jordan or Sienna in on the burden she'd been carrying. She set the phone down slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The weight of the message hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't just about the mortgage. It was about everything. The house, the illusion, the truth that had been hidden behind a smile, behind champagne toasts and polished floors. Elaine stood there, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on her, the evening's warmth fading into something colder. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, not in this house, not in this family. She hadn't been sure for a while now, but as the last car door slammed shut outside, she felt the walls of her own life closing in, and for the first time in a long time, she was afraid of what would come next. Elaine's fingers hovered over the metal drawer handle, the familiar sound of it sliding open almost like a comfort. But the house felt different tonight. It was quieter, heavier somehow, the silence pressing down on her as she reached for the file she had avoided for months. Inside the drawer, everything was organized, neat, each document in its place, carefully cataloged. But the folder marked Jordan's house was different. She had tucked it away, burying it under other files, as if distance might somehow ease the weight of the decision she had made. But now, with the memory of Phil's text still sharp in her mind, she couldn't avoid it any longer. "They know the mortgage is still under your name, right?" She opened the folder slowly, her gaze falling on the mortgage papers. Her signature stared back at her, bold and undeniable, on the line that marked her as the co-signer. She had co-signed the loan for Jordan after his last deal had collapsed. It had seemed like the right thing to do at the time, just a temporary fix, a small gesture to help him back on his feet. But the reality was much more complicated. She glanced down at the paperwork, the numbers and terms suddenly feeling like weights pressing down on her chest. There, in black and white, it was clear. Majority owner, 73%. She had never fully understood the extent of her commitment until now. 73%. She had signed her name under the assumption that it would be a short-term arrangement, a favor to her son to help him rebuild. But now, the house that Sienna had always dreamed of was far more tied to her than she had realized. Elaine's fingers grazed the edges of the papers as her thoughts drifted. The house wasn't just a loan, it was a partnership, and not just a small one. She owned the majority of it, and yet it had never been discussed that way. She had always been told her involvement was symbolic, a gesture from a mother who wanted to help. But the truth was much more complex. She was far more invested than anyone had acknowledged. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was Andrea, the mortgage officer. Elaine hesitated before answering, her heart racing as she braced herself for what was to come. "Elaine," Andrea's voice was calm, matter of fact. "I just wanted to confirm something. Jordan and Sienna can't refinance or sell the house without your approval. You're still on the deed. Without your signature, they're stuck with it." Elaine's stomach dropped. She had known this, of course, but hearing it from Andrea made the reality hit harder. All this time, she had been the invisible hand behind their dream. She had helped build it, but no one had ever acknowledged her role in making it all happen. "Understood," Elaine replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She ended the call and stared at the documents in front of her. The house wasn't just theirs, it was hers too, but she had never truly owned it. Not in the way she wanted, not in the way she deserved. "Time to sweep my half." The words were simple, but they rang with a finality that Elaine couldn't ignore. She had given enough. She had sacrificed enough. It was time to take back what was rightfully hers. The decision had been made. She glanced out the window. The last of the guest cars were pulling away, their laughter fading with the evening. It was time to reclaim what was hers. It was time to face the truth of it all. Elaine was standing in the kitchen, wiping down the counter after the housewarming, when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the urgency in the text that followed caught her attention. "Elaine, listen to this." Andrea's voice came through when she answered, sharp and urgent. "It's viral. It's already spreading." Elaine's heart skipped a beat. "Viral? What are you talking about?" "It's a recording from the community Facebook group. It's from Sienna," Andrea said, her voice quieter now, more cautious. "It's going around." Elaine felt a knot form in her stomach. Sienna? The idea of her voice spreading like wildfire felt foreign, unsettling. What was she saying? Andrea paused. "You need to hear it for yourself." Elaine's fingers trembled as she opened the link Andrea sent. The recording started, and she could hear Sienna's voice, casual and dismissive, cutting through the phone's speaker. "Elaine's presence lowers the aesthetic," Sienna's voice came through clearly, matter of fact, almost as if it were a fact she had shared 100 times. "But what can you do?" Elaine froze, the words hanging in the air as if they were too heavy for her to process. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. She hit pause, then replayed the clip, hoping she had misunderstood. But no, there it was, again. "Elaine's presence lowers the aesthetic." The words cut deep, far deeper than any insult she had ever heard. The recording continued, but Elaine barely heard the next part. She was too focused on what Sienna had said, the cold indifference in her tone, as if it were a passing observation. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate comment, made without a second thought. Elaine's fingers hovered over the phone as the clip played on, but she barely registered the rest. Maya's voice followed next. "I didn't mean to leak it, but..." Maya's tone was apologetic, almost guilty. "I'm not deleting it." Maya. Elaine hadn't expected her to be involved in this at all, but now it was clear. Maya had heard Sienna, and in some misguided attempt to expose the truth, had shared it. Elaine could feel the sharp edge of betrayal, though a strange, cold calm was beginning to wash over her. She replayed the clip, the words sinking deeper into her chest. "Elaine's presence lowers the aesthetic." The phrase was lodged in her mind, echoing in a way that made her feel like she was being physically suffocated. Sienna had always thought this, always felt this, and now the whole community knew it too. Her phone buzzed again. It was Jordan. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Sienna didn't mean it like that. She was just..." Jordan's frantic voice rushed through the line. Elaine didn't let him finish. "I'm fine, Jordan," she said, her voice smooth and composed, a contrast to the storm inside her. "Don't worry about it," Jordan sputtered, but Elaine ended the call, leaving the silence in its wake. The kitchen felt colder now. Elaine set the phone down slowly. She knew there was no going back from this. The betrayal was too deep, and yet there was a strange sense of clarity. Sienna had shown her true colors, and now it was time to decide how to respond. As she stared at the screen, Andrea's voice came through again. "Elaine, you should know, if they're renting parts of the house out, you have grounds to breach the contract," Andrea said. "You can take action if they're profiting from it." Elaine's thoughts churned. Renting parts of the house? Sienna had always been about appearance, about building a brand, creating a perfect life for others to envy. But this was crossing a line. She placed the phone down slowly, the decision growing clearer. The next move was hers, and it was time to take control. This was only the beginning. The morning after the storm had passed, the world felt quieter, emptier. Elaine stood at the front door of Jordan and Sienna's house, her fingers still lingering on the brass knocker, her gaze fixed on the well-maintained porch, the bright flower boxes spilling over with color. But beneath the polished exterior, she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. This house, their house, had always felt out of reach, a symbol of success. And yet, standing here now, Elaine could see through the illusion. The gleaming windows, the modern farmhouse facade, the perfectly manicured lawn, it was all built on shaky ground. And she was the one who'd made it possible. The HOA had been more than willing to grant her temporary co-ownership rights, a formal recognition that, as the majority owner, Elaine had a say in how the house was run. She had always known the details of the mortgage, but this felt different. Now the reality was that she wasn't just an observer in this life. She had been an unwitting partner in something far less perfect than she had imagined. Elaine stepped inside, the familiar scent of fresh wood and linen greeting her. But beneath the fresh paint, something was off. The house felt strangely impersonal, like a stage set for a performance. The silence was heavier than it should have been. No laughter, no chatter, just the quiet hum of an air conditioner in the background. She wandered through the main floor, her eyes scanning every corner. The living room was as pristine as it had always been. The open-concept kitchen gleamed, the marble countertops untouched, the stainless steel appliances shining with a careful polish. Everything was in place, but not quite right. When she reached the basement door, she paused. There was something odd about the way it was slightly ajar, as if it had been opened recently. A faint, unfamiliar scent drifted up the stairs, something floral, a bit too strong, almost like perfume, mixed with a subtle undertone of stale air. Elaine hesitated before stepping forward, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She pushed the door open. The basement suite was starkly different from the rest of the house. It was colder, clinical, with a bed in the center of the room, a desk shoved awkwardly in the corner, and clutter scattered across the floor. But it was what she saw next that made her blood run cold. A stack of neatly folded towels, an untouched bottle of hand sanitizer on the bedside table, and worst of all, the distinct smell of a hotel room. It was clear. They had been renting out the basement. Elaine's pulse quickened as she stepped further into the room. A small stack of guest review cards sat on the desk, each with a different name written in a hurried scrawl. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't just a temporary solution. Sienna had been renting out the space. She pulled out her phone, snapping a few pictures of the evidence. Her mind raced. This was unauthorized. She had been kept in the dark about so many things, but now she had proof. And the knowledge that Jordan and Sienna had been profiting off the space, without her consent, made everything feel even more wrong. She turned quickly, moving back toward the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the basement. As she neared the main floor again, she heard a car pull into the driveway. Jordan's voice drifted through the open door before he even appeared in the frame. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his face filled with guilt, his eyes avoiding hers. Elaine crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She had known it was coming, the excuses, the pleading. She wasn't surprised by Jordan's sudden urgency. He always had a way of making things sound more innocent than they were. "I didn't want this to get out of hand," Jordan started, his voice a mix of frustration and helplessness. "It was just a way to cover a rough patch. Temporary. You know how tight things have been with the house and everything." Elaine listened, her eyes narrowing as she weighed his words. The financial strain was real, yes, but the way Jordan was speaking, the ease with which he minimized the situation, was what bothered her most. She had never been part of this decision, and now she was faced with the truth. This house, this beautiful, perfect home they had built, was a facade. Built on lies, built on borrowed money, borrowed trust. Andrea's voice broke through her thoughts. "Elaine," she said, her tone flat, resigned. "You should know. You failed to disclose any of this to the bank. The subletting, the unauthorized rentals. If they're profiting from it, you have a legal right to take action. They've breached the terms of the mortgage." Elaine stood there, her grip tightening around the phone. She didn't need more explanations. She didn't need another excuse. "They built a castle on borrowed shingles," Elaine muttered under her breath, the words tasting bitter as they left her lips. She wasn't just angry, she was disgusted. The betrayal was deeper than she had realized, and now it was time to act. Jordan stood there, helpless, but Elaine knew there was no turning back now. She wasn't going to let them get away with this, not anymore. Not when the truth was staring her in the face. She walked past him toward the front door. "It's time to fix this," she said, her voice calm but sharp. And it starts with you. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the weight of what she'd uncovered didn't feel like it was closing at all. The storm had only just begun. Elaine stepped into the HOA meeting, the crisp blue of her blazer catching the light. It was a deliberate choice, professional, sharp, a stark contrast to the storm swirling inside her. As the door swung closed behind her, she felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. The room was full of familiar faces, many of them neighbors she had known for years, all polished and composed, pretending that everything was perfect. But tonight, she was ready to shatter that illusion. Elaine, Charles, the HOA president, greeted her with a thin smile, his voice carrying the usual pretension. "Glad you could join us. We've got some business to settle." Elaine met his eyes, her expression cool and unyielding. She wasn't here to make small talk. She was here to make her presence known. "Let's start with confirming the formal complaint," Charles said, motioning toward the paperwork in front of him. He didn't seem to realize just how tense the air had become. "Elaine, you filed the complaint regarding 126 Maple Street." Elaine nodded slowly. Her gaze never wavered as she spoke, her voice steady. "Yes, the complaint regarding unauthorized subletting at 126 Maple Street, specifically renting out portions of the house without disclosure." A hushed murmur spread through the room. Everyone knew which house she was talking about. Jordan and Sienna had been the neighborhood's golden couple, the perfect family in everyone's eyes. But now, that perfect image was beginning to crumble. "Let's hear from the owners," Charles said, gesturing toward Jordan and Sienna. They were seated near the back, their postures stiff and guarded. Sienna shot Elaine a brief, tight-lipped smile, but there was no hiding the tension in the air. "We've had a few guests." "Yes," Sienna began, her voice carefully controlled. "But it's not what it looks like. It's just been a way to cover some expenses. Everyone does it." Jordan, who had been silent until now, nodded in agreement, his expression defensive. "It's temporary," he added quickly, trying to minimize the situation. "We've just been through a rough patch. It's not like we're running a hotel." Elaine listened, but her eyes narrowed as she processed their words. "Everyone does it?" That was the defense. The idea that the entire neighborhood had been unaware of the subletting was laughable, and Elaine wasn't about to let that slide. "I have a motion to propose," Elaine said, standing up from her seat, her calm demeanor cutting through the room's murmurings. "I propose that we amend the HOA records to include clear documentation of ownership for all properties with co-owners. Properties that have subletting or rental agreements should disclose this information openly." A ripple of whispers spread through the room, growing louder by the second. Many hadn't realized that Elaine was the majority owner of Jordan and Sienna's house. The revelation hit hard, and Elaine felt the power shift as everyone around her began to grasp the weight of her position. Charles opened his mouth to respond, but Elaine didn't let him speak. "This isn't just about unauthorized rentals," she continued, her voice firm. "This is about transparency. If we're going to have a community here, we need to ensure that everyone is playing by the same rules." The room was still. Charles glanced at Sienna, who visibly recoiled, her defensive posture faltering. Jordan's face reddened, but he said nothing. Phil, sitting in the back, whispered under his breath, but Elaine caught his words. She just checkmated the whole room without raising her voice. Elaine didn't look back at him, but the slight smile that tugged at her lips was enough to acknowledge his praise. She was far from done. Charles cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "This will require further discussion," he said, his tone strained. "Let's table this for now and move on to other matters." But as Elaine returned to her seat, she knew the truth. The real conversation had only just begun. The power had shifted, and it was now her move. Elaine sat at her kitchen table, the soft glow of the pendant light casting shadows across the room as she reviewed the letter one more time. She had received it just an hour ago, a formal communication from Jordan and Sienna's legal team. The contents were full of empty threats, promises of swift action to clear their names, but to Elaine, it was nothing more than a desperate bluff. Phil sat across from her, a knowing grin spreading across his face as he read the letter over her shoulder. He chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "They're bluffing," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "You hold every legal key, Elaine. They don't have a leg to stand on. Elaine didn't respond immediately. She felt the weight of the letter in her hands, but it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the intent behind them. Sienna and Jordan were terrified that their perfect world was unraveling, terrified that their secrets were about to come crashing down. "Do you think they honestly believe this will stop me?" Elaine finally asked, her voice steady but cold. She folded the letter neatly and set it down on the table. "No," Phil replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But it's cute that they think they can intimidate you." Elaine stood up, pacing slowly around the kitchen, the thoughts swirling in her mind. She had been quiet for too long. They had mistaken her silence for weakness, her politeness for fragility, but now it was time to act. She was done playing by their rules. She pulled open a drawer and retrieved a set of legal papers, already prepared. She had been anticipating this moment, and now the pieces were falling into place. The letter from Sienna's lawyers, the threats of legal retaliation, the claims of defamation. Elaine didn't care. It was all part of the game, and she was winning. "I'm filing a lien on the property," she said, her voice firm as she looked at Phil. "They violated the terms of the contract. I'll ensure they can't refinance or sell without dealing with me first." Phil raised an eyebrow, impressed but not surprised. "You're not holding back, huh?" Elaine shook her head, a small smile curling on her lips. "They wanted me to stay quiet, to be the good mother-in-law, the silent partner, but they've forgotten who holds the majority share in that house." As she made her way to the phone, Elaine's thoughts turned to Andrea. She had already begun quietly locking down refinancing options through her. She didn't need Jordan and Sienna's approval to take control. She'd made sure that the financial path was already in motion. If they thought they could intimidate her, they were sorely mistaken. But as the days wore on, the ripple effects of the HOA complaint began to take shape. Sponsors who had once flocked to Sienna's side were now distancing themselves, citing the growing backlash online and the very public complaint. The flawless image they had built was beginning to crack. Elaine didn't need to be told this. She could see it in the news articles, the comments on social media, the quiet whispers behind closed doors. Maya, who had been sitting in the living room, watched her mother with a mixture of admiration and concern. She had seen the slow unraveling of her parents' lives, but now she watched as her mother seemed to thrive in the chaos. Elaine's strength was undeniable, but Maya could also see the toll it was taking. The quiet moments when Elaine would stop, stare out the window and sigh, a momentary lapse in the unyielding armor she wore. But Maya would not apologize. She knew better than anyone that her mother wasn't looking for sympathy. Elaine wasn't the kind of woman who needed saving. She had always been the one to take control, to shape the world around her, even if it meant breaking it apart. "They mistook formality for fragility," Elaine murmured to herself, almost to the point of disbelief, but there was a quiet strength in her words. Now they'll see. As the weight of the situation pressed down on her, Elaine felt a strange calm wash over her. The battle was just beginning. She wasn't done yet, and neither were the consequences for those who had underestimated her. Maya stood in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or to wait. She had watched her mother navigate this world of wealth and lies for years, but she had never seen her so poised, so ready for the fight. Elaine turned toward her daughter, her eyes sharp and focused. "I'm not finished yet," she said, her voice low but resolute. "This is just the beginning." And with that, she returned her attention to the next move, the next step in a game that had only just begun. Elaine sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen casting a soft blue light across her face. The room was quiet, save for the faint click of the mouse as she scrolled through the social media posts, each one more damaging than the last. Her eyes narrowed as she clicked on the latest post from Sienna, one she had been dreading. The words on the screen were sharp, accusing, and manipulative. Sienna had taken to her influencer account, weaving a tale that painted Elaine as the villain in their story. Her post was filled with fabricated claims, implying that Elaine had been controlling, overbearing, and even dishonest in their business dealings. It was a perfect blend of half-truths and outright lies, designed to turn public opinion in Sienna's favor while casting Elaine as the manipulative mother-in-law. Elaine leaned back in her chair, taking a slow breath as she compiled screenshots of the most egregious posts. These weren't just personal attacks, they were defamation, and she wasn't about to let them go unanswered. She forwarded the screenshots to Charles, the HOA president, and Andrea, her trusted mortgage officer. The words she typed were succinct but purposeful. These posts contained defamatory claims about my involvement in Jordan and Sienna's financial matters, including false accusations regarding my role in their business. Please review and advise on the legal action we can pursue. Elaine clicked send and sat back, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her chest. It wasn't just about their family anymore. This was a battle that was going to have far-reaching consequences, and Elaine had just made her move. A few minutes later, the phone rang. It was Charles. "Elaine," he said, his voice tense, "I've reviewed the posts. These aren't just personal attacks. They're legally actionable. You've got a solid case for defamation, especially considering the false claims about your involvement." Elaine's lips curved into a thin smile. She hadn't expected anything less from Charles. He was a man of his word, even if his intentions often aligned more with the superficial than the ethical. But this time, he was on her side, and she would make sure to use that to her advantage. "Thank you, Charles," she replied coolly. "I'll have my attorney draft the formal complaint. Let me know if you have any further advice on pursuing this." She ended the call and looked out the window, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps. Sienna had overplayed her hand. She had used her platform to twist the narrative, and now the repercussions were beginning to hit her. Elaine had just set the stage for the unraveling. The next day, Elaine watched as Sienna's carefully curated world began to crack. Sponsors started to pull away, one by one, citing the controversy surrounding the HOA complaint and the backlash from the online community. The influencer partnerships that had once seemed like the golden ticket for Sienna were slipping through her fingers. Her public image, so meticulously constructed, was crumbling under the weight of the lies she had told. Elaine knew it was only a matter of time before the media caught wind of the situation. Sienna's brand had always relied on the appearance of perfection, and now that image was shattered. Elaine didn't gloat, but she allowed herself a quiet sense of satisfaction. The balance of power had shifted, and now the consequences of their actions were starting to bear fruit. As Elaine was considering her next steps, her phone rang again. This time it was Jordan. "Mom," he said, his voice tinged with frustration, "can we just talk for a minute? This doesn't have to keep going like this. Let's just move forward. We're family." Elaine stared at the phone, her fingers hovering over the screen for a moment. Jordan had always been good at asking for peace when things got too difficult, but this time, Elaine wasn't sure if peace was what he really wanted. This wasn't just a matter of family anymore. It was about respect, control, and the truth finally being heard. She picked up the phone, her voice measured but firm. "Jordan, you can't move forward if you've erased your rearview mirror." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a quiet exhale. Elaine knew he was processing her words, but she also knew it didn't matter. The damage had been done, and the truth was out in the open. As she ended the call, Elaine's thoughts turned to the future. The battle was far from over, and the threads that held Sienna's world together were already beginning to unravel. But for Elaine, this was only the beginning. There was still so much left to do, and she would be ready for whatever came next. Elaine sat at her kitchen table once again, the weight of the decision heavy in the stillness of the room. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed out the final lines of the formal notice. It wasn't out of spite. It wasn't to punish them. But it was necessary. She hit send. The notice was officially filed. A formal foreclosure notice, delivered not as an act of revenge, but as a clear message that accountability was non-negotiable. They had violated the terms, evaded responsibility, and now Elaine had to force them to face the consequences of their actions. It wasn't the outcome she had wanted. In fact, it was the last thing she'd ever imagined would happen. But here she was, one final step away from taking back control. Her phone buzzed seconds later. It was Jordan. "Mom, please, you can't do this." His voice was frantic, panicked. This is our home. You're destroying everything we've worked for." Elaine closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. She could hear the desperation in his voice, the dawning realization that this was no longer just a threat. It was happening. He was finally seeing the fallout. "I'm not destroying anything, Jordan. You and Sienna did that," Elaine replied, her voice calm but unwavering. "This is about making things right." She ended the call before he could respond, her mind already moving to the next steps. As much as she hated it, there was no going back. The legal documents were now in place. The house was no longer just a home. It was collateral, a reminder of broken trust, a payment for years of enabling their delusions. Later that afternoon, Sienna took to social media, of course. It didn't take long for the post to appear, the carefully crafted narrative about how Elaine was now taking everything from them. "She's taking our home," Sienna's caption screamed, her eyes wide and dramatic as she held up her phone to the camera. "She's forcing us out with no regard for what we've built. This is how she repays us for everything we've done to make her life better." Elaine watched the post from the comfort of her living room, her lips curling slightly at the absurdity of it. Sienna wasn't even trying to hide her manipulation anymore. She was playing the victim, positioning herself as the poor daughter-in-law who was being unfairly attacked. It was almost laughable. But Maya, who had been sitting quietly on the couch, spoke up. "You never treated it like hers anyway," Maya said, her tone flat but filled with something Elaine couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Resentment? Elaine looked over at her daughter, her own emotions settled beneath a practiced calm. "It was never about that," she said softly. "It was about respect, about honesty." Maya didn't respond, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper, something not so easily explained. Elaine let the silence hang between them for a moment before turning back to her phone. She had already drafted terms for them, private renegotiation options. It wasn't the way she wanted things to go, but it was the only way forward. She could offer them a chance to buy her out in 30 days. They'd be free of the house, but they would have to pay for it, literally. The deal was simple. She would remove the foreclosure proceedings if they could buy her out at a fair market value. She typed up the terms quickly, ensuring they were airtight. When the time came, Sienna and Jordan would have the chance to take control, if they could afford it. If they wanted the house badly enough, they would have to prove it. The phone buzzed again. It was Phil. "Elaine," he said, his voice tinged with respect. That was mercy disguised as math. Elaine didn't reply right away. Her fingers hovered over the phone, considering her next move. Mercy, perhaps. But math wasn't always about kindness. It was about balance. And right now, the balance was tipped in her favor. She stood up, walking toward the window. Outside, the evening was settling in, the golden light slowly fading into the cool blue of dusk. She could see the house from here, from across the yard. Jordan and Sienna had always believed they could build their world on someone else's foundation. Now, the truth was unavoidable. Elaine turned away from the window and picked up the phone again, her resolve solidifying with each passing second. This wasn't just about a house or money. It was about accountability, and this time she wasn't backing down. She would give them 30 days to prove they were worthy of what they had destroyed. Then, she would see if they could reclaim what was rightfully hers, or if they would lose everything they had built on borrowed promises. And as the days began to slip by, she knew one thing for sure. This battle was far from over. The conference room was stark, beige walls, a polished wooden table, and uncomfortable chairs arranged around it. A single window let in just enough light to illuminate the pile of documents in front of Elaine. She had everything meticulously organized. Payment records, emails, legal notices, every violation Jordan and Sienna had committed, all neatly stacked. The weight of it all settled onto her shoulders, but her expression remained calm, her eyes steady. Sienna sat across from her, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face was a mask of defiance, but the subtle tremor in her hands betrayed the anxiety she was trying to hide. Jordan beside her had been quieter than usual. His posture slumped as though the fight had already left him. Their attorney was silent, watching, waiting. But the truth was in Elaine's hands now, and she wasn't about to let it slip. The mediator, an older man with sharp glasses and a sagging demeanor, glanced between the parties before leaning forward. "Let's begin," he said, his voice professional but fatigued. "Elaine, you're here to clarify your position. Please, proceed. Elaine didn't need prompting. She stood up, her hands steady, as she spread the records across the table in front of the mediator. These are the payments, the violations, the missed deadlines, and the legal correspondence, she said calmly, her voice steady but commanding. These are the facts, the truth, and I'm afraid these violations can't be ignored. Sienna shifted in her seat, her gaze flicking nervously toward the stack of papers, but she held her ground. You're making too much of this, she said, her voice tight with frustration. It's not like we've been malicious. We needed help and… Elaine cut her off smoothly. You didn't need help. You needed honesty, and instead of facing the truth, you tried to cover it up. You chose to break the rules, and now we're here. Sienna opened her mouth, but the words faltered. She looked at Jordan as if searching for support, but he didn't meet her eyes. He looked exhausted, cornered, the guilt radiating off him like a silent confession. He had known all along. Elaine had known all along. The difference was, she had stopped pretending. Jordan looked at Elaine now, his voice raw, vulnerable. Mom, please, he pleaded, leaning forward. We're family. We've worked hard to get here. Can't you just give us more time? We'll fix it. I promise. We just need more time. Flexibility. You know we're trying. Elaine sat back in her chair, her expression softening slightly, but only slightly. I'm not here to make a point, Jordan, she said, her voice still calm, devoid of malice. I'm here to make sure you understand the consequences of your choices. Time is up. The house is no longer just a home. It's a reflection of your actions. The truth is, you've already had your chance. Sienna's lips quivered, but she managed to speak, her words like venom. You're making a huge mistake. So, Elaine, you know that, right? You'll regret this. You're going to be alone in that big house. Elaine's gaze never faltered, never wavered. She didn't respond to the jab, because she knew it wasn't the truth. The emptiness in Sienna's words only solidified what Elaine already knew. This wasn't about family. It was about power, control, and accountability. The mediator cleared his throat. It's clear that both sides are at an impasse, he said, looking at both parties. But after reviewing the evidence and listening to both of you, I'm afraid I must side with Elaine. The violations are clear and the payments have been consistently missed. You've broken the terms of the agreement. You've been given every opportunity to address this, and now the consequence is unavoidable. Sienna's jaw tightened, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Jordan, though, didn't argue. His gaze fell to the table, and Elaine saw the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. I'm offering you a way out, Elaine said, her voice steady, her tone coldly impartial. You have 30 days to buy me out. I'll remove the foreclosure proceedings, but you must pay fair market value for the property. If you cannot meet this, I'll have no choice but to proceed with the full legal action. There's no middle ground left. She didn't wait for their response. She'd already made her terms clear. There was no more room for negotiation. The silence in the room was suffocating. The mediator nodded, his approval implicit in the nod of his head. He didn't speak, and neither did Sienna or Jordan. They had nothing left to say. As the meeting drew to a close, Elaine stood, gathering the papers and stacking them neatly. Her composure never wavered, and as she turned to leave, her heart was as steady as her hand. She had done what was necessary. The foundation had cracked, and now it was time to watch it all come down. Elaine sat at her desk, the soft light from the desk lamp casting shadows on the pile of papers in front of her. The room was quiet, but it felt like it was filled with possibilities. She was about to make a move that would forever change the course of her daughter Maya's future. For years, Elaine had been quietly matching Maya's savings, contributing small amounts without her knowing. It wasn't much, just a way to set something aside for her, a way to make sure Maya had a foundation she could build on. Now, it was time to make that foundation real. Elaine opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, carefully prepared for this very moment. Inside were records, savings bonds, and small investments, all of which had been quietly added to, month by month. As much as she had done for Jordan and Sienna, this had always been about Maya. Elaine had watched her daughter grow into someone who was both strong and quiet, the kind of person who didn't demand attention, but always commanded respect. And now it was time to give her the chance to take control of her own destiny. She picked up the phone and dialed Andrea's number. "Elaine," Andrea answered after one ring. "What's going on?" "I need you to open a 529 college fund for Maya," Elaine said, her voice steady. "Make it hers. She has full control over it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Andrea spoke again, her tone shifting. "That's a big decision. You sure about this?" Elaine didn't hesitate. "I've been saving for this moment, Andrea. It's time for her to have a chance to build her own future." A sense of calm washed over Elaine as she ended the call. She hadn't made the decision lightly, but it was time to let Maya step into her own power. Elaine had always seen the quiet strength in her daughter. Maya wasn't someone who asked for anything, but she deserved everything. Now it was her turn. Later that day, Maya walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the room as she took a seat on the couch. She had always been more reserved than most, often spending hours buried in books or lost in her own thoughts. Elaine had always admired that about her, but now it was time for Maya to understand that she was seen. "Mom?" Maya's voice was soft, almost uncertain. Elaine gestured for her to sit down, and when she did, Elaine slid the papers across the coffee table. "I've done something for you, Maya. I've opened a 529 college fund for you. It's yours. All of it. You have full control now." Maya's fingers trembled as she picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the information in disbelief. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elaine leaned back, watching her daughter, her heart swelling. "It's your future, sweetheart. I've been matching your savings all these years. It's time you have the chance to make something of it. All the choices, the decisions, they're yours." Maya's face crumbled, and suddenly the floodgates opened. Tears filled her eyes as she dropped her head into her hands. Elaine sat in silence, letting the moment pass between them. Maya's quiet sobs filled the room, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. "I didn't think anyone saw me," Maya whispered through her tears, her voice cracking. Elaine reached across the table, taking Maya's hands in hers. "I always see the quiet ones," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "They're the ones who change the world. And you, Maya, you're going to lead your own life. No one will ever be able to take that from you." Maya wiped her tears, looking up at her mother with wide eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Elaine replied, her voice steady. "Just promise me you'll remember this moment. Remember that you have everything you need inside you." As the afternoon sun began to set, the room felt different. The world outside seemed to fall away as Maya held the future in her hands. Elaine knew that this was the beginning of something new, not just for Maya, but for herself as well. She had given her daughter everything she could, but now it was up to Maya to make it her own. And with that, the quiet strength that had always defined her daughter was ready to rise. Maya smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. But this time it was different. This time it was a tear of recognition, of possibility. The future had just opened up. The morning was quiet when Elaine first saw the article. The first sip of her coffee was barely enough to wake her, but when she scrolled through her phone and saw the headline, her heart skipped a beat. Elaine Monroe, the quiet architect of Hillwood Estates. It wasn't the kind of article she had expected. No scandalous claims, no hidden dirt. Instead, it was a reflective piece, highlighting her role in shaping the community, her influence on Hillwood Estates, and how, despite her relatively low profile, she had quietly steered the course of the neighborhood's growth for years. The words flowed with a respectful tone, acknowledging the years she had spent helping others succeed, without asking for recognition in return. The article included quotes from neighbors, each one commenting on how Elaine had been a steadying presence, always willing to help, always ensuring things ran smoothly in the community. Former coworkers described her as the one who always got things done without asking for the spotlight. Even Maya had been interviewed, offering a rare, candid reflection on her mother's quiet strength and the impact she had had on their lives. "She's not just a mother," Maya had said, her voice soft but clear. "She's the backbone, the quiet architect of everything that's come together for us. Without her, none of it would have happened." Elaine paused at the quote, her hand frozen over her coffee mug. She hadn't known Maya felt that way, not exactly. Her daughter had always been quiet, reserved. But to hear her speak of Elaine like this was both humbling and validating. It felt like a weight lifted from her chest. Finally, someone saw her, really saw her. But the most striking part of the article came near the end, where Andrea had offered her thoughts on Elaine's strategy. She's been silent, yes, but never in surrender, Andrea had said. Elaine knows when to let things play out. The world may think she's quiet, but she's always been a step ahead. Elaine smiled at the words. Andrea had always understood her better than anyone. The quiet approach had never been about hiding. It had always been about strategy. And now, the truth was coming to light in the most unexpected way. The article was like the final piece of a puzzle, showing the world who Elaine truly was, beyond the role she had always played in the shadows. Across the room, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from Sienna's account. Of course, she had written a counterpost. Elaine knew it was coming. Sienna was quick to react, quick to protect her carefully crafted narrative. The post was long, full of accusations, and tried to paint Elaine as someone who had disrupted their life for her own gain. But the comments were locked. Sienna wasn't ready to face the truth in public. Elaine didn't bother to read more. She wasn't interested in the noise. What mattered now was that the story was out. And it was more than just her story. It was the truth, shared from a place of authenticity, and it would not be silenced. Jordan, predictably, had avoided public appearances. His silence was loud, his absence more telling than any post could be. Elaine knew why. He had nothing left to say. The story was shifting, and it was no longer one he could control. Phil had sent her a message shortly after the article went live. Truth always gets published. Eventually. Elaine sat back, taking a long breath. The fight had always been about more than just the house or the accusations. It had been about control, about making sure that when the time came, the truth would stand strong. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Phil. You should write a response, he suggested, his voice almost teasing. Set the record straight. Elaine didn't need to respond. She already had. The truth had been laid bare, not in words, but in action, in the quiet strength that had built everything she had protected, even when no one was looking. My silence was never surrender, Elaine whispered to herself, her eyes glancing toward the window. It was strategy. She didn't need to fight for attention anymore. The world had seen her, and now everything was in motion. The day Jordan and Sienna left was quiet. No shouting, no grand farewell. Just the soft sound of their suitcases rolling across the polished floors as they walked out the door. Their eyes avoided Elaine's as they passed her, their faces tight, expressions unreadable. Sienna's eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from anger or something else, Elaine couldn't tell. But there was no malice in their departure. No final words were exchanged, just a slow, silent retreat as they took their things and disappeared into the night. Elaine stood by the door, watching them go, feeling the weight of years of hidden tension lift from her shoulders. The house, once a symbol of their shared struggle and aspirations, was finally hers again. The silence felt different now, like a blank page, full of possibilities. The world outside hadn't changed, but she had. And now, this home, this space, was hers to reshape. The first thing she did was hire a team of professionals to clean the house from top to bottom. The walls, once filled with the signs of neglect, were scrubbed spotless. The floors shined to perfection. But Elaine didn't want to stop there. It wasn't enough to make the house clean. It had to feel like home again, in a way it never had before. Elaine spent the next few days repainting the walls herself, each stroke of the brush bringing her closer to something she had longed for. Control. She chose soft, muted colors that made the rooms feel lighter, more expansive. The house had been a stage for too long, a performance they had all played their parts in. But now it was going to be real. When she finished the painting, Elaine went outside to the garden. The overgrown bushes and flowers had been left to wither while Jordan and Sienna were preoccupied with their own lives. But Elaine had always loved the garden. It was where she found peace, where she could ground herself after a long day. The lavender and rosemary she had planted years ago were gone, replaced by weeds and neglected soil. With quiet determination, she replanted the garden herself. She spent hours digging the earth, her fingers getting dirty as she carefully placed each seed, each new plant in the soil. The smell of lavender filled the air as she worked, and the sight of the rosemary taking root brought a small, contented smile to her face. The garden was coming back to life, just like her. By the time she was done, the house felt different. It was no longer the place she had been trapped in. It was hers, truly hers. And as she wiped the sweat from her brow and stepped back to admire her work, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The future was wide open, and it was hers to shape. Every weekend, Maya started coming over. She'd arrive with a quiet smile, an open book in hand, and they'd spend the day together talking, laughing, working in the garden. It was their time. No drama, no distractions, just mother and daughter, reclaiming the space that had been taken from them. Elaine could see it in Maya's eyes. Her daughter was no longer just the quiet one. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be. One evening, a few weeks later, the HOA threw an appreciation dinner in Elaine's honor. She had helped shape the neighborhood, guided them through difficult times, and supported the community in ways most people didn't notice. The evening was filled with clinking glasses, polite conversations, and neighbors who were more than willing to acknowledge Elaine's quiet strength. As she stood there, a glass of wine in hand, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You know," Andrea said, standing next to her with a smile, "they called it a housewarming. But you turned it into a legacy." Elaine smiled, her gaze lingering on the crowd, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She didn't need accolades or recognition. What she needed, what she had always needed, was the quiet knowledge that the life she had built was hers, no one else's. As the night continued, Elaine felt the weight of everything she had overcome, but more importantly, everything she was now free to build. She wasn't alone in the big house anymore. She had finally found her place in it, and in the world. And the future, as uncertain as it was, no longer seemed so intimidating. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Elaine sat at the small dining table in the condo's living room, the soft rustle of paper filling the silence between her and Maya. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard boxes, a mix of excitement and new beginnings. They had been waiting for this day, and now it had arrived. The day Maya would officially become a homeowner. Maya sat across from her, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of the contract. Elaine could see the nervous energy in her daughter, but she also saw something else: pride, anticipation. This was more than just a place to live for Maya. This was the first step into a future that she would shape on her own. A future where she wasn't just riding on the coattails of anyone else. It was hers. Elaine's hand hovered over the pen, and for a moment she just looked at her daughter. Maya was growing up. She wasn't the quiet girl hiding in the corners anymore. She was stepping out into the world. And it was time for Elaine to step back, to trust her. "You sure you want to do this?" Elaine asked, her voice soft but serious. Maya met her eyes, her expression both unsure and confident at the same time. "Yeah, I do," she said quietly. "It feels real, you know? It feels powerful to own something." Elaine nodded, understanding exactly what her daughter meant. The feeling of ownership was something most people never got to experience. It was a weight, yes, but it was also freedom. Freedom that Maya had earned herself, step by careful step. Elaine placed the pen in Maya's hand, her voice steady but filled with pride. "It's yours now, Maya. You've worked for it, you've earned it. No one can take credit for this but you." Maya took the pen with a deep breath, her hand shaking slightly as she signed the paperwork. It was more than just the legal formality of it. This was a turning point for her, a moment of true independence. Maya had never been one to flaunt her success, but now, in this small but important act, it was clear that she had built something for herself, with her own hard work and her own vision. Elaine watched as her daughter signed, and a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying lifted. This was the first step, and in many ways, it felt like the first step of Elaine's own journey too, letting go, trusting, and knowing that she had done her job as a mother. After the signing, Maya let out a breath of relief, a small smile forming on her lips. She leaned back in her chair, looking around at the empty condo. "It's mine," she whispered, almost to herself. Elaine smiled back, proud but quiet. "Yes, it is." They spent the rest of the afternoon moving in, setting up the few things they had brought with them, some simple furniture. A new couch that Elaine had picked out. Maya had insisted on it being something they did together, so they carried the heavy couch into the living room, laughing and joking along the way. There was no tension, no pressure, just two people working together to create a space that would be truly Maya's. As they finished setting the couch in place, Maya sank down onto it, stretching her legs out with a contented sigh. "It feels good," she said, her voice light. Elaine sat beside her, resting her head against the back of the couch, looking around the small but welcoming space. It was a new chapter for both of them, a space where Maya could grow into the person she was meant to be, with all the potential in the world. But as the evening settled in, Elaine's phone buzzed with a message. Her stomach tightened when she saw who it was from. "Jordan, you've turned her against me." Elaine's fingers tightened around the phone. She had been expecting this. No doubt Jordan felt betrayed, hurt, and angry, but the words still stung. It was always going to be this way with him. He couldn't let go of the past, and he couldn't see that what he had built was nothing compared to what Maya was now building for herself. Maya looked up from the couch, sensing the shift in the room. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. Elaine took a deep breath, her voice calm despite the sudden rush of emotion. "Nothing," she said, her eyes softening as she looked at her daughter. Just a text, but inside, the anger was already simmering. She wouldn't let him disrupt this, not now. Not when Maya had finally taken control of her future. The world was changing, and Elaine knew that whatever came next, she and Maya would face it together. No more silencing their voices, no more letting anyone take credit for what they had built. The next chapter was just beginning, and this time they were writing it on their own terms. Elaine stared at the screen of her phone. Jordan's message was still there, staring back at her. "You've turned her against me." It was a simple text, but it carried a weight that she could feel settling deep in her chest. He didn't understand, he never had. And now, with Maya building her own future, Jordan could no longer use her to prop up his crumbling world. It was time to let go. Her finger hovered over the block button. It wasn't something she'd ever imagined doing, but in this moment, there was no other choice. She had done everything she could for Jordan, everything a mother could, but he had never been able to see beyond his own selfish needs. This was about more than just blocking a phone number. It was about severing ties with the past, letting go of the emotional weight that had kept her tethered to his mistakes. She pressed the button, and with it, the last thread of communication between them was severed. The relief was instant. Her heart, which had long been heavy, felt lighter. The door to that chapter was closed, once and for all. Elaine moved on to the next task. She picked up the phone again, this time dialing Andrea. It was time to make sure everything was in order. There had been too much uncertainty, too much hanging in the air for too long. It was time to give Maya what was rightfully hers. "I'm updating my will," Elaine said as soon as Andrea picked up. "Maya will inherit both homes and everything else. It's time." Andrea's voice softened with understanding. "You're doing the right thing, Elaine." Elaine hung up the phone and sat back, a quiet satisfaction washing over her. It was one thing to be ready to let go emotionally, but this, making Maya the rightful heir to everything, was the true act of release. It was no longer just a house or an estate. It was a legacy, and it would be passed to the person who had earned it the most. As the evening stretched into night, Charles, the HOA president, stopped by unexpectedly. He had been to every meeting, watched her navigate the turbulent waters of their community, and had always respected her quiet influence. "You taught this neighborhood something about memory, Elaine," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of subtle admiration. "Not just about property or ownership, but about what it means to build something that lasts." Elaine smiled faintly. "Memory is all we really have, Charles. It's the only thing that keeps us tied to the past, but also allows us to move forward." Charles nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. He didn't need any further explanation. He knew what it meant to let go and to build something new. The following weeks were filled with small acts of rebuilding. Elaine started a free class titled Home Ownership After 60. She had always been a quiet architect of change, but now she wanted to share her knowledge. The class quickly gained traction, filled with older individuals who had lived their lives in rented spaces, unsure of how to begin owning their own homes. It was something she hadn't considered before, but it felt right, something she could give back, something that would endure. Meanwhile, Sienna's world continued to crumble. Rejected from 3 rental applications, she was left scrambling, unable to find any place that would take her in. Her credit report had been marked, and the damage was permanent. No amount of social media manipulation could undo the damage she had done to her own reputation. Not all credit reports forget, Andrea had said to Elaine one day, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. It was a reminder that even the most polished image couldn't hide the truth forever. Elaine put down her phone after their conversation. The story had changed. She had changed. And now, she was ready to face whatever came next with the confidence that, for once, her actions had been the right ones. But in the silence that followed, Elaine couldn't help but feel the weight of something greater than just her own victory. There was still one final challenge ahead, one that would test everything she had learned, and she was ready. Elaine sat on the porch as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the garden. The evening air was warm, a quiet breeze rustling the leaves of the lavender she had planted herself. The scent of the fresh rosemary mixed with the fading sweetness of the day, and Elaine took a slow sip of her sweet tea, savoring the stillness. For the first time in years, everything felt right. The house, the garden, her life. It was hers, truly hers, and the weight of the past had finally slipped away. Her gaze drifted toward the front door as it creaked open. Maya stepped out, a soft smile on her face, her hands holding something wrapped in simple brown paper. She had a certain way of moving through the world, quiet, unassuming, but always with purpose. "Mom, I made this for you," Maya said, her voice soft but steady. She handed Elaine a small candle, the warm light from the porch illuminating the delicate wax. Elaine took it, her fingers brushing Maya's. The candle had a simple elegance to it, the scent of lavender and rosemary filling the air as she held it close. "It smells like legacy," Maya said with a smile, her eyes shining with the quiet pride Elaine had seen growing in her over the past few months. Elaine smiled, her heart swelling. "That's exactly what it is," she replied, looking down at the candle. "A legacy, a future, a place for us to build." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear over the horizon. The house behind them was peaceful, warm, filled with flowers, books, and memories of a life reimagined. The garden was thriving, and the air smelled of new beginnings. It was the kind of home Elaine had always dreamed of, not because it was grand or showy, but because it was real. It was hers, and it was the life she had created. Maya sat beside her, her legs tucked under her, and they shared the quiet as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky. The quiet was broken when Elaine's phone buzzed. She glanced at the message and smiled. It was from Charles, the HOA president. The HOA newsletter had just gone out. The headline read, "Elaine Monroe, Community Steward of the Year." She had received plenty of recognition over the years, but this one felt different. This one was for what she had built, not just for herself, but for the community, for the future she had worked to create. Maya looked at her mom, a playful grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You've earned it, Mom. You've earned everything." Elaine chuckled softly, glancing at the headline again. "It's not about the recognition. It's about creating something that lasts." Maya's smile faded into something deeper. "I want to help people own things no one can take," she said, her voice quieter now, but full of resolve. "I want to help them build something of their own." Elaine looked at her daughter, pride swelling in her chest. Maya had always been the quiet one, but now Elaine saw her stepping into a role she was meant to play. She had the same strength, the same quiet determination that Elaine had always had. "Then teach them to read the fine print," Elaine said, her voice steady, her gaze focused on the horizon. "That's where the real power lies." Maya nodded, her eyes thoughtful, her fingers tracing the edge of the candle. The conversation drifted, but the moment lingered between them, full of unsaid promises and unspoken understanding. As the night wore on, Elaine leaned back in her chair, looking at the stars. Her mind briefly returned to a different time, a different life, a memory of the housewarming party at Jordan and Sienna's. The toast Sienna had given, so full of pride, saying how grateful Elaine should be to finally see a real home. Elaine's lips curled into a knowing smile. She didn't tell Sienna the mortgage was still in her name. Some truths, Elaine realized, were better left unsaid. The past was gone, the house was hers, and the future was wide open. The door they had walked through was no longer theirs to control. The journey ahead was her own, and it was only just beginning.